Okay, this week we're going to talk about uh, concrete and abstract individuality or abstract individual, based on, of course, two readings. One is the general introduction to Grundrisse. The other one is the preface to critical political economy, and of course thesis 6 and 7. So the question is, what is a concrete individual, or what is concrete individual? In order to answer the question, we should first articulate what concrete means in Marx's materialist dialectics. Marx defines concrete in the preface to the critical political economy as the unity of diverse aspects. In this sense, the concrete refers to real, essential relations between diverse phenomena. That is, it pertains to unity of differences, the totality of apparently multiple irrelevant facts. In theoretical thought, that is, in the ideal reconstruction of reality in thinking, such totality is arrived at by concepts that reveal the essence of the real and of the object, and as a tool of cognitive activity, thus facilitate accessing the essence of the real and acting upon that essence, and reveal the necessary connections among aspects of diverse objectivity. Just as a particular phenomenon is devoid of meaning by itself, and thus is indeterminate and abstract, an isolated concept is just a mere abstraction devoid of life and meaning. In other words, concepts, a theoretical reconstruction of real essences, are meaningful only within the web of concepts, only in relation to other concepts and as a determinate aspect of totality. So it is with the real factual things, like other than concepts, the real things, so to say. To make it clearer, let's briefly compare the traditional Marxian approaches to concept and their relation to historically determinate and thus concrete phenomena. In traditional atomistic individualistic view, concept in the final analysis is reduced to the meaning or to the sense of the word. In Kant, for instance, on the one hand, concept is treated as a general notion, while on the other hand, it is conceived as the pure or the transcendental form of concept, a category of reason entirely a priori. For Marx and Engels, to the contrary, because human activity, and therefore human itself, is by definition social, meaning human specifically with the emergence of capitalism is a truly social animal, particular forms of its activity, such as perception and cognition, too, are social. The social makeup of human activity, perception and cognition included, is manifest in, yield, and is strengthened through human language. With the same token, concepts too are social realities to the extent that they function as ideal social tools. The traditional view of concepts, when compares concept to contemplative sensual image of a thing, conceives the former as a lesser, impoverished, one-sided, and in this sense abstract image. As Hegel puts, in this view, quote, the abstract is counted of less worth than the concrete, because from the former so much of that kind of material has been omitted. To those who hold this view, the process of abstraction means that for our subjective needs, one or another characteristic is taken out of concrete, and it is only incapacity of understanding to absorb such riches that forces it to rest content with meager abstraction, end quote. What is of great importance and should be emphasized through and through from a practical materialist point of view is to bring forward the objective necessity of phenomena independent of subjective chimeras and aspirations. Instrumentalism and pragmatism, for instance, aim at blurring this vital distinction and claim that it cannot be made. Accordingly, any concept is construed as a projection of subjective desires, aspirations, and impulses on the chaos of sensually given phenomena. Such views stick to representationalism. They also obliterate the boundary between objective and subjective, also obliterate the boundary between concepts and notions. One implication of such approaches will be the debates surrounding delineation of science and scientific theories, for instance. Pragmatism intends to explain, for example, theory choice or theory change with reference to what they call external factors. Concept in this sense bestows meaning onto, or better to say, extracts and expresses external factors, I'm sorry. To the contrary, like from materialist point of view, concept is what bestows meaning onto, or better to say, extracts and expresses the meaning of a specific element of the entirety of reality. To have meaning, as Vygotsky, for instance, puts it, is to be made into a tool that is to become a concrete universal, which not only is applicable within the system this particular meaningfulness is a part of, but is also applicable within other systems and engulfs new areas of reality and newer significances. Concept is concrete because it is the non sine qua tool of specific form of action. It is universal because it is a tool that has application beyond the immediate context within which it has been produced. Now, let's go back to Marx's definition of the social essence of human being. Quote, this is what Marx says: the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In reality, it is the ensemble of social relations. Accordingly, the definition of human essence cannot be reached at by enumerating the apparently common features of members of a community. It is not through such empirical generalization that a true definition of human being is reached, no matter how hard one tries. Rather, human society is to be conceived of as a historically emergent, concrete, that is historically determined entity of which the human individual is a curvature and instantiation, if you wish. As, for instance, in this respect, Ilyankov states, human society is a most typical case of concrete community, and the relation of a human individual to society is a characteristic instance of the relation of individual to the universal. This last point betrays the fetishistic approaches to individual and individuality, both in sciences of nature and in human sciences. In empiricist-inspired views, at the lower level, a system is considered a summation of individual elements. At a higher level, such image is expanded onto the relation between each system, which in turn appears as individuals of higher order. For instance, an individual human body is considered an amalgamation of certain physical elements, physiological elements, ignoring the specificity that identifies human being in contradistinction to, say, non-human animals. Moreover, this individualistic fetishistic picture is generalized to define human society as an amalgamation of such biologically or spiritually distinct individuals. Even at a higher level, this fetishistic image is generalized to determine cultures or societies as mechanical devices that are related to other cultures or societies, just as an individual element is related to another. What remains identical in all these conceptualizations is the tendency to identify the specificities of the behavior of the mechanically conceived individual device with reference to an average of the properties found in each individual member. Among such fetishistic approaches are Weber's voluntarism and Durkheim's social determinism, for instance. In the latter, meaning in Durkheim, society appears as a reified or fetishistic entity that emergence of which is inexplicable. It is not clear how and where from does it come to existence. It is just there, like boom. The individual in this picture is but an automaton, something extremely determined by the so-called society. Hence, it is indeterminate and abstract. A science of social psychology on the basis of this view would be an abstract as the entity it allegedly studies. The Weberian picture does not amount to anything much better. Similar to Durkheim's model, in this picture too, social and individual are externally related. Society, in Weber, is a randomly formed crowd. It consists of abstract individuals, as individuals in this picture are naturally given a historical indeterminate entities, and thus the consequent society as an amalgamation of these individuals is as much abstract and indeterminate. Marx's criticism of Robinsonade, like if you read when you look at the general introduction to Grundrisse, Marx's criticism of Robinson is a criticism towards towards such an indeterminate abstract conceptualization of individual, which amounts to naturalization and thus fetishization of the existing social order and the bourgeois individual. Robinsonade does not signify a turn to nature, but it reflects the civil society and what is inherent in it, that is egoism. So this is Grundrisse, page 83, if you take a look at it. Political economists, such as Ricardo and Smith, takes this image as their vantage point, reflected backward onto the past. They do not consider it as a historical result, but as a point of departure. And this is what I mean by fetishism. Robinsonade, therefore, is the naturalization or ontologization of the individual as the member of bourgeois society in form of a general individual. It takes an abstraction of mind, that is the individual in general, the individual human person as an ontologically separate entity in and by itself. So is bourgeois understanding of production process. Production and language are always social for Marx, meaning that they appear only when humans are assembled together and not when they are, by definition, isolated and live, say, in wilderness from the outside. Production is always historical. That is, it always assumes a historically developed form. And thus, in fact, there is no such thing as production in general, but to repeat, as an abstraction of mind. You know, that's, again, if you go through the introduction to the Grundrisse, Marx talks about it a lot. It refers to, but this production in general, as an abstraction of mind, refers to aspects of production common to all epochs. Thus, production in general, which is but a general abstraction, in contrast to historically specific determinate abstraction. So it is a new form. It is in this sense that it is an abstraction of mind. So in a sense, it is an abstraction from all determinations. Hence, Marx sets the task of political economy as determining the relations of production, relations between humans and nature, and identifying both what is common to all production and what is specific about each particular form. In other words, to form the concept of production that reconstructs the generic root of production and thus explains the unity of the differences in forms of production. The main reason, looked at from this view, from this point of view, the main reason behind classical political economy stance that begins the analysis of political economy by the analysis of production in general and the preconditions and laws of production is to smuggle in the idea that the laws of bourgeois relations of production are the eternal universal laws of production that are not bound to history. Again, this is exactly like what happens with the Robinsonade picture. So it is not some sort of a return to backward or something like that, but it's a projection of now, of the present state of affairs onto the past. The same is done when it comes to distribution. To put it differently, production is abstracted from its historical specificities and reduced to some general features common to all epochs. And this is Marx now, but just quote, the two main points which all economists cite under this rubric are property and its production by courts, police, etc. So that's the whole magic, as a matter of fact, of within this abstract way of looking at, like existing order, and as well as onto history and this whole process of production and the relation among human beings. When it comes to political economy's treatment of labor as the essence of wealth, Marx deploys the same materialist critical method of analysis. So Marx reads, labor seems a quite simple category. The conception of labor in this general form, as labor as such, is also immeasurably old. Nevertheless, when it is economically conceived in this simplicity, labor is as modern a category as are the relations with this simple abstract. Note that Marx differentiates here between labor in general, or labor as such, as the general abstraction, transhistorical activity, and labor as a determinate abstraction, as value-producing labor, or in this sense, as abstract labor. It is the historical emergence of general human labor, or abstract labor, that produces value, which yields the concept of labor as such. The problem is that when this general human labor is not conceived in its historical concreteness and is made into a transhistorical generality, the very historical specificity or determinate abstractness of this concreteness is ignored. Thus, this very historically specific concrete determinateness appear but as a transhistorical naturalness. Labor in general, thus conceived of as if it is transhistorical category that forms the essence of wealth in general. So it makes sense when Marx, comparing the bourgeois society as the most complex organization of production to, say, pre-capitalist forms of society, states that the former is the key to understanding of the latter, just as human anatomy contains a key to anatomy of the ape. This does not mean that bourgeois relations can be naturalized and generalized to all history. This would be the mistake of the ideologists. Rather, the formation of the concept of higher forms enables us to grasp the common genetic root of all these formations, as well as the roots of their development. This last point facilitates understanding Marx's method of analysis, that is, the method of ascending from the abstract to the concrete, and not the other way around, as it is assumed by formally minded bourgeois political economists. The concrete assumes its concreteness due to historical determinateness. It is concrete in that it can function as the unit of analysis of an organic whole. Once reflected upon itself, this very method also explains the historical possibility of its own emergence as a materialist dialectical method of analysis of the abstract and the concrete. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that, like it explains also why it is at this particular historical epoch that, such a method, like emerges, why it was not clear so much to former, let's say, political economists, philosophers, critics, and so on and so forth. A misconception such as general human labor, therefore, is possible only on the basis of a mode of production that is perverse in its essence, that reduces in reality all labor into abstract labor. Hence, Marx writes, this is a long quote I have from Marx, indifference towards any specific kind of labor presupposes a very developed totality of real kinds of labor, of which no single one is any longer predominant. As a rule, the most general abstractions arise only in the midst of the richest possible concrete development, where one thing appears as common to many, to all. Then it ceases to be thinkable in a particular form alone. On the other side, this abstraction of labor as such is not merely the mental product of a concrete totality of labors. Indifference towards specific labors corresponds to a form of society in which individuals can with ease transfer from one labor to another, and where the specific kind is a matter of chance for them, hence of indifference. Not only the category labor, but labor in reality has here become the means of creating wealth in general, value that is, yes, and has organically linked with particular individuals in any specific form. Here then, for the first time, the point of departure of modern economics, namely the abstraction of the category labor, labor as such, labor pure as simple, becomes true in practice. Now, just to wrap it up, practical materialist approach treats individual in its determinate concreteness. Concreteness of individual does not consist of its being an entity with physical boundaries of which can be drawn, the physical boundaries of which can be drawn against others. Such concreteness would amount not to more than Weberian individual. The concreteness of individual signifies its being a member of society. It should be mentioned that society is a reality that transcends its individual members by preceding them, and in being the totality consists of accumulated human experience, where experience includes all human artifacts, physical and ideal, as well as practices. In other words, the mode of production as a historically emerging totality. Yet, it is subject to change and transformation, as society is not actualized independent from the activities of its members. It is reproduced and transformed on the basis of such activity. Although an abstract transhistorical character may be attributed to human activity, to praxis, production, labor, in reality, activity is actual, and so is the society within which human activity takes place, because, as Marx and Engels draw attention to, human social activity and labor as the height of such activity always assume a definite historical form. Given the role of labor in emergence of human consciousness and its appearance as a truly social entity, zoon politikon, the individual consciousness as the curvature of the social attains a specific historical form. It is historically determinate and thus is concrete. This concreteness is manifest, determined, and actualized in specific forms in relation to the type of artifacts and tools through which human activity is realized. These tools and artifacts include abstracting and thinking tools deployed for manipulating cognitive activity, the external world and the internal world of emotions, conceptual systems, material tools of action, and works of art. Conceptualizing the concrete contributes to constituting the proper conceptual theories and tools through which maturation of science takes place, and which enables us, to properly grasp the concrete human being in its real concreteness. So that's what I wanted to say in relation to the general introduction and to the preface, and of course in relation to thesis, particularly thesis 7, I think. Now the ground is yours for debate, questions, comments, criticism, everything, like that you wish.